Thank you for tuning in to episode 80 of the Worldbuilder's Anvil with your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I'm your co-host, Michael Miller. Today's topic, what kind of world builder are you?
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the Worldbuilder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. All right, now welcome back to the Worldbuilder's Anvil. And today's topic is, what kind of world builder are you? Now, what comes to your mind when you hear that phrase, Michael?
I mean, immediately I would think genre. So, like, what kind of... I guess I take that not so much as what kind of world builder person am I, but what kind of world am I building as a builder?
Correct. And that's exactly what we're not talking about today.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. So essentially what we're going to talk about today there are different ways to construct worlds, and a person's personality, a person's desires can play a huge part into it. So it's a way to select a format for you to approach when you go to build worlds. So I mean, you're coming at it from like a construction standpoint. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So you're literally talking about the different way you approach the task of building. Exactly.
Okay.
So, and one other side note with that too is, if you're like me and you're an obsessive Googler, there are 10,000 ways to spell world builder. Like obviously with my show World Builder's Anvil, I have one word. You can split into two words. You can hyphenate it. Pretty much any way you want to spell it, and even incorrectly, you'll probably get some Google results. So keep that in mind too if you're doing research for world building for other areas.
My recommendation would be, if you're doing a Google search for world building, because it's such an intricate task, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in somebody that doesn't at least spell the words correctly. So if you happen to misspell it by accident and hit enter, I wouldn't read the article at that result.
I hope I spelled it on my logo correctly.
I'll have to double check that before posting the next episode.
All right, yeah. But yeah, no, that's maybe a fair point. And the good thing is now with Google, it will actually tell you when you spell it wrong. And however, especially like if you're hashtag searching, it's the reason you see a lot of times in one word now is because of hashtags. And it's usually better to link your genre name to it as well, to fantasy or science fiction, or you might even call it a universe, because science fiction guys like to call it universe building because they're so much better than the rest of us.
Would you include, like, say, well, I was going to say franchise building, but they'd probably get a lot of sports stuff in response to that.
That's one of the flaws of being a fantasy writer, because you write in fantasy
world building. It might be like fantasy football, fantasy baseball.
Fantasy football is the bane of a fantasy person.
Yeah, but you know what? I there's a real easy way to solve that problem. Just write science fiction.
Oh, no, actually, like Mike, if you listen to his interview,
Michael.
Oh yes, Michael. Either one of those two in the last episode. We actually have two co-hosts, Mike and Michael. He just has one voice.
It's a filthy lie.
But I consume more science fiction than fantasy. I love fantasy, and the thing is, especially as I go through and I'm writing fantasy, I don't want to be too influenced by stuff out there, but I love writing.
That makes sense.
Or reading, I guess.
For half a second, I was going to say I was surprised by that, but like, we've also talked a great deal about a lot of science fiction stuff. But because you have such a huge fantasy world and such an in-depth fantasy world, part of me was a little surprised by you saying that you're bigger on the science fiction, but then your reasoning makes a lot of sense.
Well, actually, and I don't think I've actually played Gardul in the Space Age as well.
When we did, actually, no, Nate ran that campaign.
Oh, the Scavengers
campaign. I was going to ask, what have I don't know. I don't think I've ever played in your spacefaring campaign.
No, and it's something I only did once. I played around a few different time periods as well on Gardul. Mm-hmm. I played a Western style game. I tried to start it. I did it only one version because it was sort of later in life, where being able to get players for a campaign is more difficult once you
Yeah, married kids, hard to...
Or just start with a job. I mean, good luck. Yeah.
Try to
once you start working full-time.
Any listeners that ever tried to organize a tabletop game will empathize with that difficulty.
And then I was doing one for a while, which was a lot of fun, and it was one-shot adventures of Orc Raiders. And the party...
That sounds really familiar. I think I might have been on that.
You were invited, and more people had characters than who show up. I played it a couple times, so you might have done one or more of those. And that was a lot of fun, too. I think people sort of enjoyed being the orcs. Because you always play what people consider the good guys. And one thing you'll learn, about my world as you learn more about it is I like playing on stereotypes. And so when I bring you from the perspective of humans, your stereotype of an orc will be sort of people's generic stereotype who know fantasy, which is orcs are the bad guys.
Yeah. You hear orcs, you think Urukai, you think World of Warcraft. Immediately comes they're the generic enemy.
They're the generic enemy.
Big muscle-bound green bad guys.
And so I really liked the game because it showed it from their perspective, and it's different. They're not the bad guys in my world. And actually, they're my preferred race in my world. It's funny because I never storytell from their perspective very often. But they're not meant to be. That's just the way orcs roll, And orcs in my world are sort of the opposite of the stereotype, too, because from Tolkien, they are the industrial overlords. It's like they will overproduce the world. They destroy the world to make the weapons of war they need to conquer the world. So there's this imagery of them being the bad part of capitalism, which will cut down all of the trees, mine every piece of ore to make the war machine.
Yes, strip mining the world for selfish purpose.
Yes. And my orcs are actually vary from tribal to as industrialized as humans. And because both humans and orcs will have troubles with over-industrialization at times. But that's just how my orcs roll. But I did a space campaign. It was the last probably campaign I ran. And I think I got so annoyed running it because the story I was telling ended up coming up in books that were released around the same time, and it really annoyed me, so I ended up blowing up the whole universe. I made it the player's fault, but that's what happened in the game. So.
What do you mean you push the green button? Yeah, that starts the engine. Nope, blows up the world. What do you mean it blows up the world? It's your fault. You should have known.
You pushed the start button.
Look, in the other 5 games, when I pushed the green start button, it started the ship. Why would that be different now? You didn't get the memo? What memo? The memo from the super secret agency that you guys have been fighting the entire time. It was kind of sarcastic.
Yes. Okay.
It was written in Badrakan. I don't read Badrakan.
You've never told us how to read it. Not my problem. Okay. So now, to get in... there's a great article I found on a website called Lit Reactor. There will be a link to it in the show notes for this episode.
Now, where do you actually find the show notes?
The show notes would be found on Gardul.com. That is GARDUL.com. And, which is a great resource for all the episodes. If we talk about stuff and there's a link, I'll put it in there. If there's something in Amazon, I'll put links to things on Amazon as well, too, because we get affiliate feedback as well.
Now, for those of you that are not aware of Jeff's techno jargon, that quite simply means that if you go to Gardul.com/Amazon, it'll take you to Amazon. But Gardul gets a kickback for doing so. It helps us. It helps the show. If you want to continue to see developing material and developing spin-off shows, which we're going to be getting into, that's how you help us out, along with listening to the show, which is great. So if you just need to go order your favorite movies, some of which that I will recommend throughout the show, or books, or however you want to consume your fiction, or even groceries, clothing, however, and you want to go to Amazon, you do us a huge service, and we really appreciate it if you go through it by going to Gardul.com/Amazon.
Yes. Now, back in from Amazon, that's after the episode's over, or pause and go do it right now. Either way works for us. Now, I found this site called litreactor.com because I was looking for words that have been used by someone else that sound good to steal. And I like the way this person phrased it, so I want to be using their lingo here.
Do you happen to know the person who wrote the article? Can you give them a shout out for?
I would, except I don't know how to pronounce it. And I'm not going to try.
No, I think you should try, even if it sounds miserable.
Very fair. I think you would pronounce this, and I apologize because I will slaughter your name. I actually mispronounce my own name often, so don't take offense to this. I believe it is Ranjan Kanya, And the name of the article is The Building of Worlds, and it is from litreactor.com. And I like the way they structured it down. I think it covers all of the basis for the different types of how you build worlds. And the first selection they came up to is called the architect. And to put it in terms of the show I've used so far, I've always said a framework-built world. And that is the idea that you have the structure of things in place before you talk about them. And that way, the consistency is guaranteed from A to B. So if you go in and you see where I use actual Badrakan words on my website, those actually have a real meaning, real context, real grammar. My states have elaborate systems of factions. They have elaborate systems of cultures, one or more, evolved into the state.
Races, politics.
Exactly. So it's like for an architect builder or a framework builder, you know everything ahead of time. And that, to me, is key because I consider myself, obviously, an architect in Ranjan's terms.
Well, you're saying you consider that key, but that's from a selfish standpoint. It's key for you.
Yes.
So if I'm following you correctly, an architect builder creates the world and then secondarily creates the story.
Or the way I like to think of it is when the world is ready, I could tell any story I want to in it and not have to worry a lot about getting the world consistent because the world
exists for you.
So I might be adding new characters into it, but the time, the place, the historical event that it's wrapped around already exists, or at the time I decide to write the story, gets added in. So it really saves a lot of time there, and it really works well for me, and it definitely would not work for everyone.
So what we're really talking about here is just, again, I feel like I'm like triple clarifying, but I want to make sure everyone gets it.
Spoon feeding, yes.
Just Jeff's referencing a prior episode, but I think it's necessary. I think that just the nature of the show, the World Builder's Anvil, you are trying to help people create their worlds, and you're basically adding tools to their toolbox. And what you're talking about here is not the tools specifically, but how to use them.
Yeah.
So the architect it's an archetype, really.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is a construction archetype. One way to approach how you're going to create your fictional world.
Yes. And now to think of some examples where you think it might be an architect. And we sort of briefly had this before. There's the 800-pound gorilla of fantasy fiction. Is Lord of the Rings. And this is a quintessential architect style of building a world, to the point where he was such an architect that he didn't have a chance in his life to get to his entire world. I mean, pretty much if you go in and look at that map in Lord of the Rings that came in the copy of the book that you originally had, most of that he had worked out. And he had bits and pieces of other parts of the world and a huge landmass that never really got covered much because he didn't have a time to build it, but he had very intricate, correct languages, definitely better than any language I could put together because that was his background.
Well, yeah, him being a linguist, he's got a little bit more to stand on.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't realize. I think anyone that knows anything about Tolkien knows that, but people that don't, there's a lot of people out there that just, love the movies that don't know the books or Tolkien. So, his educational background. But I want to say that I read something that talked about that he wrote the books as an exercise to display the languages that he created.
Yeah.
I don't know how much accuracy there is to that, but I have heard that.
Now, I've heard sort of slight variations. I've heard that and slight variations of it where he wanted a world to display it, or he kind of wanted to come up with a new mythology for people in England. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably more true. And I think though he really wanted to show off his languages too. And if you read his books, you can't miss them.
Yeah. The big point here is that Tolkien created multiple, he has full language. Like throughout the books, you might only get pieces of Elvish, Old Elvish, Orcish, Uruk-hai, whatever language that he's referencing within the context of the story. He has a full language for every one of those. And I mean, if you're going to go to the trouble to create all those languages, he's got histories and geographies, just like anyone else building a world, but he's got a fully created world before he even wrote the story.
Exactly.
So that's an architect.
And that is the quintessential architect right there. And we'll ask for forgiveness right away. Mike and I are...
Michael and
I, we're geeks and we get very obsessive, but we're very broad level geeks. I think we geek out over a lot of things.
Yeah. Like I think the both of us get, specifically, I mean, like anybody who I subscribe to, Chris Hardwick's of the Nerdist, definition of a geek or nerd, which is not so much that you were in the AV club and played a lot of chess, while we certainly welcome them, but really we fall back on think about how nowadays people use the word geeking out or nerding out, or I am a Game of Thrones nerd, or I am a baseball nerd. Yeah. It's really replaced the word nerd with enthusiast.
Yeah.
You're passionate about a given thing, and that's what it is. And for you and I, there are certain things that we are very enthusiastic about in the nerd, what would be considered nerd-centric, but we also have touched on such a broad quantity of different, medias and nerd hobbies that we have that. I mean, I certainly have a really broad base of like nerd stuff that I love.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like when they're players,
say that again.
Players.
Play it.
Players, but players.
Oh, I see what you're using lingo. You're using slang.
I heard that on YouTube earlier.
Well, I mean, do we want to talk about your gangland?
No.
Okay, so never mind Jeff's gangland history.
Well, pretend I didn't say that.
I'll pretend you didn't say it. Play it.
I learned that when I played GTA. I can't remember that one. 3?
3? Yeah.
Yeah. Los Santos.
No. That's like 5. I mean, that's not actually 5, but it's like it's actually like the 6th or 7th game. There was 1 and 2, Vice City, 3, Los Santos.
I think it's Los Santos. Yeah.
And now 5.
Or San Andreas.
And San Andreas. That's what it was. Los Santos, I believe, is a place within.
Is it? It was one of the communities,
but San Andreas is.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because sometimes people get much more obsessive over single properties. And there's someone who loves Lord of the Rings out there who's
screaming at
who's
them.
Screaming because we're like saying, the Elvish language, and it's not called that, and we know it's not really called that.
Please respect that we respect your love for that fiction, and we also respect a great deal Tolkien's work. We don't mean to say anything
but if you do want to yell at us, make sure to put an episode in when you yell at us and say in this episode, and then share the episode as well. And you got it wrong.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. You can put that on there, and definitely do it on Jeff's Twitter feed. That would be grand.
Yes, but essentially that is what an architect is. Now, there's some pros and cons to being an architect. I think the biggest pro is once you have a framework built, you have this great capacity to roll out stories, and they don't have to be a traditional genre story. It could be a romance. It could be any form of story you want to tell. You're looking for a time and a place that you think it fits into the world. And if the world's big enough that there's enough history, it's easy to find a time to tell a story.
And also your world answers a great deal of questions for you.
Yes.
Like you don't have to worry about, how am I going to make this work? Because you've already laid the groundwork by creating the world and having a detailed world already in play. It's basically like building a playground.
Yeah.
Like if you don't build monkey bars, you can't play on the monkey bars. So if you don't build a world where a certain type of story can be told, that's a limitation. Yeah. And limitation breeds creativity. So find a different way to do it. Yeah. Whereas if you haven't built the world in this fashion and you start getting so far into the story and then you realize you've created a contradiction or a stumbling block, you've kind of, pigeonholed yourself into the corner. So
I would agree. Now, the con would be the ability to waste time.
I was just about to say that.
And then this kind of goes back to the previous episode's real world task where I was talking about just start doing something. A way to escape starting something is over planning. And this is an easy way to do it, especially if you want to go to a place where you're sharing it with other people. A great way to hide yourself from that is to world build.
Yeah.
And
So storytellers out there, you could spend years building an incredibly beautiful, wonderful playground of a world. But if your goal is to tell a story and you spend 2 years building the world, you haven't told us anything yet. You may have created an amazing landscape, but you haven't shared a thing with hopefully I'm going to use the lingo we were talking about last episode, avatar. Yeah. Your target audience.
Yes. And so that is the risk. So at some point you have to know when, and the way I like to think of it is I want to cover what's in the story in detail, and I want to have a good amount of detail surrounding the story. So, if the story takes place in one city, I would want to know everything about that city, or not really everything, but a good amount of detail about that one city. And then about the state it belongs in. And that way I have room to expand in future stories. But that's all I really need to talk about that story is the area it's going to happen in, the rules of the world, and the area around it, especially because you're more likely to reference it.
Or, have you ever had this where you're writing a story and you find that you sit down with the intention of having the story go in a particular way, and you've created some cool characters. And once you create a character, just like when you create a world, you lose a little bit of control over it because you've now created rules for them to govern themselves. Yeah. So you may create the hero and your intention is for the hero to do X action, but once you've gotten so far in the story, that action no longer becomes appropriate to his character. Subsequently, you can have circumstances where the characters hijack the story that you're intending to write, and sometimes that will take them beyond the world you've already created. So you want to have your playground have the limitation of, think of it like a target. So you have the center, that's where your story is going to take place, i.e. the city that you were just referring to. And you want the whole story to take place within the city. But you need to know the outer circle. You might not even get to that outer circle, and in this analogy, the outer area of the city, or even a neighboring city, or even further out. But you should know at least a little bit about it so that if something occurs and you realize, oh, you know what? I need them to go to that warehouse outside the city. I need to get the entire group within the context of the story to be isolated. So subsequently, I need to take them away from an area of the world that I've built into an area that I haven't quite built yet. Yeah. So,
and actually, I have a very good story about that. Actually, this talks about one of the games that you played in.
Okay.
And this is actually working in reverse. A lot of my storytelling for a long time took place in a city called Highwall, and in Bedraken that would be
Highwall.
That would be called Kleinfar, which would be the actual Bedraken pronunciation of the city.
That's the city name. Okay.
Yeah. And so a lot of my games didn't necessarily take place there, but they spent a lot of time there. And when I started the theater troupe game, I actually expected the players, and you get this, it's a lot harder in interactive media, especially, I think, in tabletop role playing, because I've experienced there in controlling the players.
I just want to point out real quickly, you're saying the theater troupe game. I'm making the assumption that you've covered in enough prior episodes that people know what you're
Probably
referring
not.
to. Please explain that.
This would be a game where the idea was the players were all members of the theater troupe in the city. And to give a background of it, there was actually a major army marching on the city.
So now, unlike a lot of fantasy stories where, like, what's the first thing you look at? D&D, Tolkien, Game of Thrones, you have a lot of characters that are combat-based. You have action heroes in armor. And none of the characters in this story, I mean, some of them were relatively combat proficient. Some of them were stage combat proficient. But none of them were, like, hardened veterans. Yeah, none of them were hardened fighters, and that lent itself to some much more interesting story creation.
And I don't know if you actually know this from your perspective, but the point of the game was to get the players to leave the city to go out and explore the world a bit as a troupe of traveling actors. And they completely they hunkered down.
Yeah, we stayed right in the city. Okay, it's not safe in the world right now. There's an army coming. Yes, there is an army coming. They're coming here. Which is why you shouldn't be here.
And so the irony was, and this is the benefit of the architect style world, is I had so much developed in the city. I had monsters in the city. I had good guys and bad guys that I don't know how long that game ran. Probably for a year-ish.
Probably a little more.
Maybe even more.
And, that example also completely highlights what I'm talking about, where the characters hijack the story. You wanted us to be out in the world, and we stayed put.
Exactly. And it was exactly what you're saying, but in reverse, where I thought you were going out to see more, and they stayed put, and I needed a lot of detail there, and I had it, luckily. And it was a really fun game. Great player chemistry.
Very emotional interactions on that game.
Yes. And some ant zombie overlords. If you go back to episode 79, you'll learn a little bit about them. But they weren't the crux of the story, but they were important sort of throughout.
Yeah, but even really a footnote by comparison to some of the other events.
Oh, yes. Yes, they were meant to... They were sort of the continuity that allowed me to figure out what was going to happen.
Did you ever read the side story that I wrote about the leaves?
I don't remember.
We'll have to get into that at some point.
Okay, we'll have to get into that at some point. Okay. Now, going back to the different types of world builders, there is also the gunslinger. This is the utter opposite of me.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yes, it sounds really cool because the word gun is involved in slinger, and you think of Westerns. It's not involved with Westerns so much, but it's this ability to sort of have very little detail going into a story, maybe even none. And as you are coming up to a new concept, a new race, a new culture, you're developing what you need when you need it. And I have a lot of respect for people who can do this successfully. And there are some people out there who can do this successfully because it works for them. And where I said before, or Mike and I were talking about, I would be painted into a corner if I didn't have the detail. They would probably be painted in a corner if they had the detail. And
see, it seems to me like if you were going to create a series, that a gunslinger type might be a little difficult. Like, it seems to me that like that would lend itself really well to if anyone's been in an improv troupe and had the experience where you have to fly by the seat of your pants. Yeah. Of course, gunslinger makes total sense. But it seems to me that it'd be a little bit of a Trojan horse of a strategy, because if you are creating it as you go, if you get to a point where, just like what I was saying before, where you might have to contradict something you previously created, as you flesh the world out, it might become harder and harder to remain consistent.
Yes, and the consistency risk to me is the reason why I architect. But there are people who gunsling it, and some people do it very well.
And also, I think what gunslinging lends itself really well to is if you just want to tell a story. Yes. If the world isn't important, the story is the point.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot more in one-shot fiction, or in and like especially like a board game world, or even maybe like something like it's not a good example, like a one-shot fantasy RPG like video game.
Okay.
Say a Suikoden. They're just kind of putting that when they need a new piece, they're creating a new piece. And I want to apologize for a second to the Suikoden people in case they actually did create the whole world ahead of time. They didn't need to in the scenario that they were building the game. They needed a new piece, you create a new piece. You need a new monster, you create a new monster. You want a new race, you add a new race.
My thought is they probably would have had to, because within the context of a video game, you have to have it all built beforehand.
Well, from a project standpoint, you more have, I need X number of monsters. And
fair enough.
And for important things, you need more detail up front, but you're really coming at it from more, the project wise, you would obviously have it completely planned out. But the detail wise, you're probably coming up with a lot of the stuff as you go.
I'm gonna sidestep and nerd out for just a second, because Jeff is referencing something that is very near and dear to my heart. So Suikoden is a Japanese role-playing game that was released in the United States. I believe all of its subsequent sequels made it to the States. I'm not 100% sure of that. One of the most unique things about it was the first one came out on the original PlayStation back in a day when your role-playing games would have 3, 4, 7, at like a max, maybe 20 characters in the game. Suikoden had 108, and you could get all of them, and almost all of them could be applied to your party. Some of them, specific purpose they were like a resource, so you'd get a given person to have a resource at your castle. You had a castle. Who, as an adventurer in a video game in early 90s, had their own castle?
I did.
Such a great game.
Yeah. No.
So for the video game players, I'll give you a quick little task. Go find Suikoden or Suikoden 2. They're not cheap investments.
No, unfortunately,
I have both of them.
Unfortunately, I don't have an affiliate with PlayStation Network. However, you can actually buy Suikoden 1 and I believe Suikoden 2 now as downloadable content.
Oh, that's fantastic. If you guys have it, go get both of those games. They're lovely.
On PS3, definitely. And I'm assuming by extension, the PS4, you'll be able to download them at least at some point.
All right. So back to Gunslinger.
But it's this idea that you can really, as you go, develop your world. And for people who are freeform thinkers, and depending on the kind of story you're trying to tell, it could work perfectly. For me, and obviously Michael.
Why does that sound weird to you?
I always called you Mike. And I don't know if it's from my friend back in the service, Mike Miller, but I've always called you Mike.
Have you always called me Mike?
I've always called you Mike.
That might be true. I think your wife has always called me Mike as well.
And if she has, it's my fault.
Well,
as in all things that happen.
So, listeners, don't call me Mike.
So, Michael here, as I would always call him that correctly. I don't know. We might have to put up a contest at some point where, people will have to guess how many times I called you Mike.
Well, they could just go back and count, though.
Yeah, but if they're not going to the trouble to go back and count every episode.
Oh, so you want to do this like a number of episodes?
Yeah, down the road sometime. We'll have to do that.
The thing is, though, for us to know that answer, that we have to keep track of it, too.
Yeah, so not going to happen.
Okay. I mean, we could. The thing is, this would be funnier. We could just lie. So you and I...
Prove us wrong.
You and I agree on a number that sounds about right. We do the contest, and no, I went back and I counted every one. There's 36 times you called between episode 80 and episode whatever. You said 36 times you called him Mike, not Michael. Like, yeah, but you didn't listen to the edits because we cut that out. So those count as well. How am I supposed to know that? You weren't. But thanks for listening to all the episodes again.
Yeah.
I was like, no, it's actually 86. 86? That's like, it's way wrong. There's like another 50 count. I don't know how you missed 50, but he said it 86 times.
I got a slightly better way of, instead of saying it quite like, we'll make up the number, what we'll say is, will we identify as Jeffrey saying Mike and Mike correcting it? So there might be other occurrences that we don't consider.
It still sounds like you're going to have to go back and count all of them.
Yeah, sure.
Well, the contest is your idea, so.
Yeah, I'll do that. And I'll come up with a number, don't worry.
I totally believe you in the way that I don't totally believe you.
Okay. But now look at the sort of pros and cons of a gunslinger. A gunslinger, the pros are it allows you for really freeform storytelling.
It also means you can start your story immediately.
There's no excuses.
Yeah.
Which could also be a con if you're looking for an excuse. You don't want to do this.
So this show is not for procrastinators in that we're not going to support your procrastination. No. This show is for procrastinators in the fashion that we want to enable you to succeed.
Yes.
So if you're sticking to your procrastination, you could just stop.
And speaking of avatars, my avatar is someone who wants to construct an architect world, a framework world.
Okay.
However,
so your target audience, you want people like
my perfect listener.
Your perfect listener.
Now, there are people who want to do it and they don't agree with everything I say, or they're like, why would I need to know that right away? And for them, maybe one of these different forms we're talking about will make more sense.
See, I think that's too limiting. I would like the listeners to know that my perfect listener can build their world any way they want to. I like you all.
Brown noser. Okay.
Nope. I'm open-minded enough to realize that while I have one way of doing things, there are other ways to do them, and they're both right.
Well, that's the way. Yes, and I'm completely opinionated, and my opinions. I judge you not in your choices.
Don't listen to me. He's totally judging you.
All right. Now, the last type of world building style would be what they call the gardener. And Ranjan actually got this term, I believe, from George R.R. Martin, who used it.
You may have heard of him from
What's that?
Song of Fire and Ice.
I don't listen to music.
You're not familiar with that?
I don't listen to music.
You don't know that song, The Song of Fire and Ice?
No.
Okay. Well, if you don't know the song, you may know the show called Game of Thrones, which is adapted from the books by Martin, A Song of Fire and Ice.
Well, I think season 1 was the first book. Season 2 was the second book. I think
it was
season 3 was
the last book,
I guess, and was
they've
not so
now.
closely related. And we
well,
won't.
I mean, like any book adaptation, there's always going to be stuff either missing, combined, or new. Like they'll add and they'll take stuff away. It's never going to be a direct, perfect adaptation.
And as a writer who loves video, I get it because they're different mediums, and
you can't do it. Yeah, you can't do the same thing. I mean, the one thing that I do like with that example in particular is, unlike taking a book and turning it into a movie where you're taking 80,000 words and putting it into a 2-hour movie, there's not enough room for everything. So a lot of stuff gets cut out. A perfect example is Ender's Game, getting back to science fiction. Great book, really good characters and relationships. And I enjoyed the movie. I was very excited about the movie, and I knew going into it the movie was not going to be a perfect, one-for-one adaptation of the book. And that's okay. I felt that the things that they cut out were good, and there were things that they left in that I was very pleasantly surprised that still made it into it. But with Game of Thrones, you have, there's 4 books right now? 5 books? I don't read the book, so I don't know for sure.
I believe there are 3 books, 1 per season, and the 4th book has not yet been released.
Okay. We're going to go with that. If we're wrong, we apologize. Respectfully, we love the fiction.
Except
there's 5 books. Okay, we're for our producer support is telling us that there are 5 books. I apologize for not knowing that ahead of time. But the thing that I really like about the fact that we have 5 books and we have a series is they have hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to flesh out what is in the book and put it in front of us. I mean, sure, there's still not enough time for them to cover everything, but they're doing a really good job covering a lot of it.
Spoiler, everyone dies.
Every time you do that, I cringe. Even though you say spoiler and even though you don't say anything more specific than everyone dies, watching the show and knowing what I know, it still creeps me out that you say it every time.
Especially when it's not over yet. You're like, but I like this character. They're going to die.
Don't listen to Jeffrey. Just watch the show.
I'm shooting for a Reservoir Dogs ending on the final episode. The remaining characters will all kill each other at the same time.
That should be fun. I'm trying to think. There's another movie that did a really good job of all the characters killing each other. But I can't remember what I'm thinking of. Well, I'll keep going if it comes to me. If it comes to me, I'll say it, and that'll spoil everyone else watching it. So
now the Gardner type, there's some real strengths to
the Gardner type. That's what you're.
What did I say?
I just want to confirm that that's what you said.
Yeah, the Gardner
type.
The Gardner type of storyteller. The real strength of it is here. And this is, I think, much more important for people who are creatively doing this with an intention to, at some point, deliver a product. To some degree, you should be doing gardening to a point. And this is really, the question is, are you extreme right-wing or left-wing? You're probably somewhere in the middle, not either one. And so, in a way, everyone's probably really a gardener. Wow, that's really a cop-out. Wow.
I was going to say, your description is a little vague for me. Go deeper on that.
So the idea is, if you take, like, what a right-wing person in politics means. No one actually fits that definition. And every possible thing that could make you a left-wing political fan, no one really fits that definition completely. They might almost be at the absolute, but they're not quite. So
there's still stuff that they subscribe to that's on the other side of the aisle.
Exactly. And it might just be a step towards the other side of the aisle, but it's still, no one's really probably 100% gunslinger or architect. And if you're delivering content, you should not be 100% of anything, because probably in reality, you make adaptations that work for you.
So to be clear, what we're saying here is that the Gardner type is an amalgamation of the gunslinger and the architect.
Yes.
Okay, so they're going to spend so much time building the world. They're going to spend so much time flying by the seat of their pants. They've got some basis either way. They might come to a point where they have to make it up as they go, and they might have other areas where they're playing in a arena where they've already created it all. Or
like if they come up to, like, say, a new race that is introduced in a story, that's the point at which you need the language. You don't need, and if I did this for Garduel, I would not even be starting a podcast at this point, because Garduel is huge and I have probably 1,000 languages I have to make at some point. But I don't need them right now to start talking about Garduel, because that's one area I had to compromise, because creating an actual real language takes a lot of work. And even though mine's probably crappy real language, because a linguist is not my profession or it was way out of my skill set because I wasn't even taught phonics at school.
Really?
So for me, it actually helped me a lot, learn a lot about the sounds and how they work more because I was never taught that. I was taught sight reading. So I take bits and pieces of words and I try and match them in my brain with actual usages of them. And I push the sounds together, and which will lead to really strange, in English especially, it'll lead to really strange pronunciations of words, which would be correct from a sight reading standpoint, but are wrong from a phonics standpoint. Because in English, we for some reason suck at sticking to rules, which is another important lesson for a different episode. One about languages. But
I think another important thing to mention about our different archetypes of world builders is that this is a set of 3 that, Jeff and I agree it seems to cover all bases. It's not to say it does cover every base. There might be a type of world builder out there that doesn't quite fit into one of these labels. And we're not saying that you have to have a label, but man, does it help if you have a way to go about it, kind of a blueprint, so to speak. If the blueprint of how you want to build is architect, then you have a way to go about it. Like that's the point of this episode, to kind of flesh you out as a creator so that you know how you want to go about it. The more I find that the more organized I am if I'm going to write a story, I find I actually do a lot of reading. Yeah. Like I definitely like to gunsling story write, but I have found from experience that if I do that, I'm going to I'm going to paint myself into a corner. I'm going to write myself into a point where I'm like, okay. Now what do I do? Yeah. And I was writing a story. I was writing a zombie story actually. And, the main character in the story
lived
what?
He lived.
No. Well, maybe. But the main character of the story was a mason, and I don't mean like a Freemason. I mean he works with stone. So
the actual meaning of
the meaning of the word mason. Like I'm a tradesman. I'm a licensed electrician by trade. So that's what I kind of subscribe to is the blue collar worker. So I wanted something that was approachable to the average reader, something most people could identify with, not necessarily on a specific level, because there's not a lot of people out there that work with stone. Sure, there's a lot of them, but there's an awful lot more people that don't work with stone. But there's a lot of people out there that know what it's like to work hard, and masons work hard. So that's what I wanted to be as an in for the reader to approach the character. But for me to write from the perspective of a mason, I needed to learn a lot about stone.
Yeah.
So I started reading up on the tools and how they do it. And, I basically learned how to build a patio, not physically, but intellectually, so that I could talk about it within the context of the story. Because that's one of the first things that happens in the story is that he and his business partner are building a patio. So I needed to be able to describe that and share that with the reader in an interesting way without being inaccurate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. From an IT perspective, it's all widget to me, so I just can apply anything to a widget, so it's all the same.
It's a widget. It fits.
It fits.
Gunslinger.
Yeah, the irony being, from a writing standpoint, I'm very much a gunslinger.
I was just about to ask you that. From a world builder standpoint, you're an architect, but I was going to ask from a writer standpoint, do you find you're more a gunslinger?
I'm more a gunslinger. I think a lot of that is from my history of telling stories interactively through role playing.
Yeah, because you got to make it all up on the fly.
And you played my games. I give lots of freedom to my players, and I sometimes punish them for mistakes.
Yep, I'll let you do it, but me letting you do it means I'm going to let you do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And as soon as from a player standpoint, as soon as we hear that, we're like, do I really want to do that?
But it's like
Jeff will give you more than enough rope to hang yourself.
I don't give out magic weapons a lot, but rope I would give out in buckets.
It's a lot of rope. Oh, what are you going to need a rope for?
But yeah, no. So it's like when I come up with a book concept, I write an outline for the book because I do want to know where the plot goes. However, that's it. It's like I have some other information on the world stuff from, my world, but, for the story itself, I have the story arc. If it's involved in a longer set of stories, I know the overall story arc that's going to happen. But when I write the first draft, I write chronologically chapter 1, 2, 3, and I just write to the end. And then when I get done, it's like you have to a lot of times add more stuff in to get substance that you
kind of fill it out
to fill out the story. But when I write that first draft, it's literally I start in chapter 1. I just look at my arc, and my arc ends up becoming my chapter layout, and I just boom, 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 write chapter to chapter, and the characters do what they do. And I've never really painted myself into a corner, but
that's because that's because you're creating a structure beforehand. Like you might be. Like your creation method might be gunsling, but it sounds like your skeletal structure is still architect because you're laying out a roadway, so to speak. So it's like, okay, well there is a road, and the story can gunsling drive all over that road, but it's not going off the road.
You might think that, but have you seen my show notes? They're bullet points.
Oh yeah, well, are you talking about those ones that you showed me for the last one? Yeah,
that's my book outline.
Oh, well, that's fine.
And that's
how I wrote mine.
The way I don't always follow them in order and that kind of stuff, that happens. Well, so it is, it's kind of how the story feels as it's going. And, but there's definitely, like I said, it's really Gardner, but heavily towards free form where I don't know all of the characters are going to show up. I don't know any of that stuff until I get to writing it down.
Yeah.
Except for I know a couple main characters in the book, and that's about it. That is all we have. And you notice there was no rating in this episode. And the reason is, it makes no sense.
No what?
No rating.
No rating.
A rating does not make sense for this. And that's the reason why there's no rating for this episode.
No.
This just...
Yeah, I actually didn't really notice that. We usually say that at the beginning, huh?
Well, I used to say it after, but now I'm going to say it at the beginning. And I didn't mention it here. And I remembered at the end, but it doesn't matter because there's no actual rating for this episode because...
It's about who they are and who they want to be.
About who you want to be. And you can completely ignore this and it won't change your world at all. However, I do think if you kind of have an idea of who you are, you'll make better work for yourself. You'll make your life easier. So there is no rating, but there is a world building task for the day.
I thought there would be.
I always give them even when they're completely irrelevant. And this time is just come up with what kind of world builder you are.
Even if that means you have to create your own archetype.
Mm-hmm. And if you do and you come up with something that doesn't make sense here, make sure to share it to either myself or Mike. I am
Michael.
Yeah, that guy. At Jeffrey at JEFFERY W.
Do me a favor.
INGRAM.
Because I'll bet there's a couple of people listening to this with a pen. Mm-hmm. So say that slower.
At JEFFERY WINGRAM on Twitter.
And if you want to get Michael on Twitter, you can get me at MAYSH0D.
Okay, Downer. All right.
Yes, that's a very, very good point.
Again, we said that earlier this episode, I thought. I have to mention that more? Okay. Yeah, no,
so... Our producer is saying that we should... I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep calling Jeff's lovely wife, Kristen, the producer, because she is adding a lot to the show. Kristen is reminding us, and by us, I mean you guys, to go to the website. Go to Garduel.com and look at the show notes.
Yes, and they will be there every time.
And I encourage everybody not just to hit us on Twitter, but there is a place on the site where they can add content, right?
If they go in under the show notes, this is set up, so it's a commenting system for WordPress that is easier on my web server. So you can just go there, leave a comment like you would on any blog site for the show notes, and I do occasionally get comments there.
Yeah, so. And I'm encouraging, if you are a world builder, and I hope you are because that's why you're listening, and you have a good archetype that it doesn't fit into what Jeff and I have described at all, then by all means, write it there because there's probably somebody else out there that feels the same way about it and might need a little structure that you've created.
Most definitely. Or if there's another article like this one that you think breaks it down in a better way, share the articles. Let us know what's out there.
Or even just a different way.
Or a taller way. More height. I don't know how that makes any sense, but it should. All right.
You're so vertically focused.
And now, instead of vertically focused thing again.
You're so vertically focused.
All right. And now for the real world task for the day. Now, you know that these are all very important to make your lives and relationships better. So the thing I need you to do is contact me on Twitter. Make it DMs, not in public, and give me good ideas on how to convince my wife that we need to buy the collector's edition of Fallout 4. And I need the Pip-Boy attachment, not her. So if you could come up with that right now and give me...
Wait. So you're trying to tell all of our listeners who we try to encourage and support by giving them real-world tasks, tasks that should be serving them, to do a task that serves no one but you.
Well, I wouldn't...
Who else does this task serve?
The greater good, I like to think.
So there's a greater good that requires you to have a Pip-Boy.
A metal collector edition Pip-Boy.
For those of you that aren't aware, Fallout 4 is coming. For those of you that are aware, buy Fallout 4. And Jeff needs a collector's edition. I support your need, not want, for a collector's edition. I don't support giving all of the listeners a task to make sure that you get one. I think you can handle getting one on your own.
Okay.
So how about we come up with a World Builder's task that's going to be a real-world task that's going to be a little bit more relationship focused to their relationship, not your relationship with your wife. That's your responsibility, not theirs.
I'm really stuck on Pip-Boy. How about don't lie to get what you want? That might be a good one.
That seems kind of lame. A little basic. A little basic.
What do you want?
How about instead of picking something that is so self-serving, how about you take some time today to be a little more selfless? Pick something that you don't like to do, something you really don't like to do, and do that for your friend, your significant other, your mom, your dad, your wife, your husband, whoever. Something that you don't like to do that maybe they also don't like to do. In my house, that's dishes. My wife hates doing dishes. I'm not a big fan of it either, but they have to get done. We don't have a dishwasher. So go do the dishes or some other task that's equivalent that someone else is going to appreciate the fact that you did it. And here's the big thing. Even if they don't appreciate it or even notice, do it anyway. Because sometimes you do some really good in this world and no one ever picks up on it. And that's okay.
Or if you want to, you can just something my wife doesn't really like and tell her that you're doing it so I can get the collector. Wait.
You're getting back to stealing credit for other people's effort.
Yeah, that's kind of scummy. Listen to Mike.
It's a little scummy, Michael. Yeah. What you could do
is call you Michael.
Yeah, you could do that. Something you really don't want to do is maybe you could ask them for everyone to send you $1 so that so that you could just get your Pip-Boy.
Yeah, this is like a great reason to have a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be difficult for you to convince Kristen to get the collector's edition. Kristen, what do you think?
Yeah, no. Well, what I was going to recommend is that if they're going to pre-order Fallout, that they could go to Amazon.com or they could go to Garduel.com/Amazon, and that will help you pay for your.
Wait, so you're saying if I was to go to a web browser and type in Garduel.com, that is GARDUL.com/Amazon, that would actually take me straight to Amazon, and it wouldn't cost me any more money, and I could help support Worldbuilder's Anvil, which who doesn't want to do that? Because then I could afford...
You could afford your own Pip-Boy. You could selflessly buy the first collector's edition for your wife, Kristen, because I am 100% certain, she's waving right now, that she wants a Pip-Boy too. And I'm thinking this has to be a 2 Pip-Boy household. I don't think 1 Pip-Boy is going to be enough for the 2 of you. I really don't. You guys, one of you is going to be wearing it to bed. You know, you'd be like, no, it's my turn to wear the Pip-Boy. I think it's a recipe for disaster if you only buy one.
Yeah. And I could put the Yahtzee app on my phone if I wasn't having a Pip-Boy on my arm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would definitely...
So the real thing that you should take away from this is think of others. Go to Garduel.com and /Amazon and buy yourself something or buy something for someone else, but think of us when you do that.
All right. All right, now the tease for next episode is maps. We are going to go back to maps. I've not talked about maps for a while, but we are going to go crazy into maps.
This is like one of your favorite subjects.
Yes, I do. Well, I want to actually make Mike go through over 4,000 maps I have in the other room right after this.
Didn't I just do this like a year ago?
Yesterday.
It's not the same maps, right? You're not going to make me go through the same maps.
Well, the same maps plus the ones I've made since then.
Are these all Gardual maps or are these any real world maps?
Well, some are cosmology. Some are Gardual. I don't... Real world Gardual is real to me.
I'll tell you what. I will go through all of your maps if you will give me an audio recording of the entirety of the 2011 NEC, that's the National Electrical Code Book, which is a telephone book of thinly printed paper, all technical legal speak. Fair?
No. See you then.
Have a great one.
And as always, make sure to go to Gardual.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, Worldbuilder's Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the Worldbuilder's Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardual.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.